Hello, folks. Welcome to one of many Haya VIS-2000 tutorials. So this tutorial is meant to cover what you would expect to see when you first receive your system and you get it powered up. Hopefully everything's plugged in. And what we will be covering in this particular tutorial is how to configure your bank controllers and uh, enable or disable your station nodes. So you can purchase this system in blocks of 12. So each bank controller controls up to 12 plants, uh, all the way out to 72. So you may only have one bank controller, two bank controllers, three bank controllers, and this is how you configure the system so that your intended use is known in the system. So without further ado, we will jump right in. So you're going to go to System and then Settings, and this is where you configure your bank controllers. It's important to note that there's a distinct difference between adding a bank controller to the config and disabling a bank controller. And we'll cover that here in a minute. So you can't disable, you can't take, not disable, sorry, you cannot take a bank controller out, a bank one out of the config. You always have to have at least one bank controller in the system or the system's pretty useless. So you'll find that bank one is always in the config, no matter what you do. It's also worth noting that at any point in time, if you're in the system and you're not sure what something does, you can push this little question mark bubble and it'll come up with a little help menu kind of explaining what that particular feature does, which I think people find that useful. So this system currently has all 6 bank controllers. So if you only had a 24 plant system, you would basically just click that or tap that, and then now bank 2 is enabled, and there's your 24 plants. You get 12, 24. If you have a 36 plant system, you would do that, and if it's a 48 plant system, you do that, and if it's a 60 plant system, you do that, and a 72 plant system, you do that. And right now, all the bank controllers are plugged in. If you try and enable one that's not plugged in, it'll go red. Is what'll happen, and you'll see that instead of green, it'll be red. So uh, that's adding a bank to the configuration. I sometimes accidentally use enable and config interchangeably, but really they're totally separate. The bank config is letting the system know that I want this bank controller to be part of the config. It's not the same thing as enabling the bank, and I'll explain why in a moment. So we're going to just do a 36 plant system in this case, just to kind of demonstrate some things and keep the video as short as possible. So once you've done this, now you need to go enable the actual station nodes attached to that bank specifically. So you're going to go into this bank valve config. So you go there and you'll see that the 3 banks are down here. So we're going to go in here and we're going to basically turn station 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to turn all these guys on. Okay. When it's done, go into bank 2, enable all those station nodes, and I'm going to explain why this is important here in a minute. Done. Okay, now we're going to go to bank 3. And I'm actually going to disable station node 1 just so you can see what that looks like here in a minute. Okay, so we finished that. We hit done. That brings us back to here. And now I'm going to kind of jump back over to the main page. So now we have bank 1. That's bank 2. You notice that, okay, now this bank is disabled. So in order to enable it, you're going to tap right on where it says bank 2, and that'll bring it up. And then you're going to tap there and that'll bring it up. And notice that, remember, we had bank 3 station 1 disabled, and that means that's out of the config completely. It's not going to run. It's totally disabled. And so now I'd like to go into why we have a difference between a config and enabling a bank. The config means the thing exists, and these things communicate through each other. So bank 1 communicates to bank 2, and bank 2 communicates to bank 3. Let's say you have a problem in bank 2, and but you don't want to take away bank three. Bank three is fine. There's just some big problem in bank two. Maybe it's a plumbing problem or whatever, a power problem. Who knows? Maybe there's no telling. So what you can do is you can go to bank two and you can say, I want to disable bank two completely, but keep bank three enabled. And the system will just jump right over it. It'll just not water bank two because that's not part of it's not enabled, and then it'll go straight to bank three. So it's still in the configuration. It's still aware of it. It still uses it to communicate to bank three, but it basically pops it out of the enable criteria, so it won't actually run during a runtime. It's very useful if you have a problem and you just want to kind of bypass a bank, but you still want all the banks that are downstream of that to communicate and work as normal. That's why we have it a configuration as a separate thing to a enabling of the bank itself. And you can see when you enable or disable it, it kind of fogs out. It's kind of obvious, if you jump from one to the other, it gets much brighter. So there's that. And then the other thing worth noting is this disabling of the bank. So um, this will be covered later in another tutorial, but basically, you can go in here and set a whole bank volume. So, we'll actually just do it real quick right here. So I'll say, okay, I want this to be zero point 0.2 gallons for the whole bank. So every plant in that bank, I want it to be 0.2 gallons. You hit enter and you see everything changed to 0.2, but this stays disabled. And so for example, we used to kind of zero these out if you didn't want it to run. The problem is every time you did this process, it would add this 0.2 to the one that was zeroed out, and then it would try and water it. And if it's not plumbed in or there's a problem, it would trigger an error. So this just pops it out of the config completely. It won't run. It won't try. But the other really cool thing is it won't try and everything will be fine. But if you go, but it still sets this to 0.2. It just knows not to run it, if that makes sense. So if you were to go back into systems settings, valve config, and we were to add this back into part of this, station node enable, it's enabled now. We're gonna go here, come back out, hit done, and go into bank three. You notice that it assumed the same thing that the rest of these are. So in the background, it's still setting the volume to 0.2, which is most likely what you're going to want. It's just not actually running on a runtime. So it's still managed when you're putting it in. It's just doing it behind the curtain, and it doesn't actually run it. So that's pretty much it when it comes to how to initially set up your system, configure the bank controllers correctly, and then enable your station nodes that you want to run. It's also worth noting that, for example, if you want to, if you did want to disable some station nodes, you really shouldn't like hit and miss these. You should 1 through 6. So let's say you only wanted 8 station nodes active. You should use the first 8. The system will do a lot better uh, when it comes to auto commissioning and stuff, which we'll discuss here in another tutorial. But you really shouldn't go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. You should go 1 through 6, 7, and then 8, and then leave 9, 10, 11, 12 open. And that the system will act a lot better. So that's something worth noting. Other than that, I think that pretty much concludes this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and there'll be more tutorials to come.